where all life was once blended together. But how could all life be blended together in the Erd Tree if the Erd Tree appeared after life existed? Well, there can only be one answer, right? That the Erd Tree is a parasite, and it took over a tree that existed here before. This ancient tree was called the Great Tree. So the Great Tree was almost certainly the location of this primordial crucible, and it must have been a very powerful primordial force for the Greater Will to have commandeered. It might even be the reason the Lands Between is important to the Greater Will in the first place. It also explains why spells and enemies related to the Great Tree's crucible would eventually be looked down upon. For example, the Knot Talisman is fashioned from a knotted vestige of the crucible, and it was considered a signifier of the divine in ancient times, but is now increasingly disdained as an impurity as civilization has advanced. Enemies related to the crucible are the Omen, the Misbegotten, and the Crucible Knights, and all three of them would be shunned, enslaved, or imprisoned. Those who speak for the Erd Tree don't want you to know its roots, so to speak. According to the spell, Protection of the Erd Tree, in the beginning everything was in opposition to the Erd Tree, but through countless victories in war, it became the embodiment of order.
In Marika's own words, the Erd Tree governs all. The choice is thine. Become one with the order, or divest thyself of it, to wallow at the fringes, a powerless upstart.
But the Greater Will needed more than a big tree. It needed loyal agents in the Lands Between. To this end, it has the Two Fingers, who are its envoys. The Two Fingers heirloom has a weird picture of them, but it reads, "Of course, fingers cannot speak, yet these are eloquent. Persistently they wriggle, spelling out mysteries in the air. Thus did we gain the words of our faith." These words are interpreted by the Finger Readers. These are the undying old crones that you would have found throughout the Lands Between. They pass down the wisdom of the Two Fingers, or at least they used to.
Your fingers, please, your fingers. I can read them.
Most of them appear to have lost their purpose, and they're desperate to read your fingers and tell you annoying riddles, since their two fingers are likely dead. And yes, of course, there are multiple sets of Two Fingers. You would have found their corpses on the tops of the divine towers. Atop these towers, you loot the fingers in order to activate the true power of a great rune. Specifically though, you are giving benediction back to your great rune. You're taking a blessing back from the two dead fingers, essentially. This is just one of many blessings that the Two Fingers can bestow, and my point is kind of that the Two Fingers clearly have more than just influence. They have real power on some level. The Greater Will needs these powerful envoys and agents because, while it's obviously incredibly powerful, it does seem limited by a few things. First is space. The Greater Will didn't come to the Lands Between itself, it sent an elden beast to do its bidding instead. Second is time. There is a moment later in the game where your pair of Two Fingers go still because they're forced to commune with the Greater Will for guidance.
When they are finished, the fingers will again offer their guidance. But thousands, if not tens of thousands, of moons must first pass. No matter for me. But you, how will you ever manage to wait?
So the Greater Will needs a physical manifestation of order. It needs envoys to convey its will, but what it also needs is a god. Introducing Marika the Eternal. I have this utterly enormous mind map of Elden Ring's lore, and there's a reason she's at the center. She's essentially the equivalent of Gwyn from Dark Souls, except unlike Gwyn, Marika didn't just crawl out of the dark and find power. To an extent, it seems like she earned it. We don't know much about her origins, except that she is of the Numen race, which is actually an origin that you can choose in the character selection screen. Numen come from outside the Lands Between, and are supposed descendants of denizens of another world, long-lived but seldom born. At some point, Marika was chosen as an Empyrean. What is an Empyrean?
Hello.
An Empyrean is a being chosen by the
Hello,
Fingers
how are you?
as a candidate for godhood. As an Empyrean, Marika received the aid of a shadow to do her bidding. So what is a shadow? Well, it's a wolf, shadow-bound to its Empyrean by the two fingers. Luna Princess Rani is another example of an Empyrean with a shadow-bound beast. You would have met Blythe. These creatures are the Empyrean's very own shadow. They are completely loyal to their needs and, by definition, incapable of treachery. Marika's shadow was a beast called Malakath. Every Empyrean uses their shadow in different ways, but Marika's sole need of her shadow was as a vessel to lock away destined death. So what is destined death? Well, according to Enya, it's the rune of death.
The rune of death goes by two names. The other is destined death.
We mentioned earlier that the Elden Ring is made up of runes, and at some point, maybe when she was chosen as a god, Marika plucked the rune of death from the Elden Ring. She gave the rune of death to Malakath, her totally loyal shadow, who bore a black blade imbued with this rune. It's kind of genius, really. In a single act, she removed the concept of death from the lands between, while also commanding total control of death through her shadow, who could deliver it at her whim. Now, some of you might be asking, if death is removed from the lands between...
No, it's
First off, shame on you.
just
Second,
channel
from your point of view,
Vati
isn't really death.
Vidaya.
Simply in the process
It's
of
a
its spirit,
channel
its
about
soul,
lore
returning
from
to
software
Earth.
games
Catacomb
like
dungeons, for
Elden
example,
Ring,
are
Dark
specifically
Souls,
constructed near the
Demon
roots of the great tree
Souls.
for this reason, so that the Erd tree can reabsorb their ashes back into it. This process replaces
Just
the concept of death that we
use
were
it
destined
like a
to have.
background.
But this random spirit outside of a catacomb dungeon says it best. As another example of this theory, when you kill a major boss, you receive a remembrance of them. These are spirits, and they are hewn into the Erd tree. In this way, thanks to the Erd tree's grace, their spirits are immortalized, in a sense. This new form of death also explains what's happening when you summon spirits.
From ash and return to the Erd tree.
However, some spirits never return to the Erd tree, and they rise within death as corpses or skeletons instead. So this was the new order, and it's important to stress that it was in this moment, when the rune of death was removed, when destined death was taken, this is when order became the golden order.
The forbidden shadow plucked
I
from
think
the
it will be
golden
possible
death
you can
its
only
grace.
one
Specifically, this was
viewer
one
here
golden
because
order. So not only
I'm
did she
super
become
rarely
and a vessel
streaming
for the Elden Ring,
and
she became
people
remembered
don't know
as
about
Marika
this.
the Eternal.
I never
All
share
power
when I
needed
will be
for
start
death. It
or
was a
what I will
huge
be
part
doing.
of her character and her reign as
It's
well.
just
However,
random,
Marika had more
like
than
a
just
weather
Marika,
change.
she had wars to fight,
We can make
as the world was
prognosis,
occupied by many
but
forces that did fight
I
over
think
the
it's
Elden
not
Ring.
work.
There was war with the Storm Lord, who likely ruled over Stormvale, and there was a war with the Giants, who were masters of a flame that could burn the Erd tree. There was war with the ancient dragons, who incidentally had stones that could twist time and thus slay a god. And finally, there was war brewing with the Carrion royalty, who had previously obeyed laws which contravened the Golden Order.
No, I
Sort of similar to
super
how
rarely
Interville
make
needed an
content
Empyrean
because
to
I
enforce
don't
its
have
will,
enough time
Marika herself
for
needed
this.
someone to wage war. So
If
there was
I
to be a
need,
husband,
if
a
I
consort,
want
an Elden Lord.
make it
The man
more
chosen was
professional, I
Horolu,
need spend
a ferocious
all
warrior
my free
who became known as
times
the
for
Lord of
the
Battlefield. His crown was warranted
for
by
this.
blood, and while it was for this strength that Marika married him, he was also required to
Because
take a
it's
vow to
like a
conduct
second
himself
work.
as a lord. To
At the
suppress
moment
the ceaseless
I
lust
make
for
it just for
battle that
fun.
raged within,
I don't
Horolu
have
took the
maybe
beast
special
regent's witch
special
upon his back.
ideas, things. I
This is
just
another example of a beast being given for the purpose
do it
of
just for
serving
fun.
order. Thus, in this moment, he went from being Horolu, warrior, to Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, consort to Queen Marika, and a certified demigod. Godfrey and Marika had 3 demigod children.
Where is
together.
YouTube?
There was Godwyn the Golden, who you saw being killed in the opening trailer. And there were also the reviled Omen twins.
Oh, if you want to
The Erd Tree and Moog,
export your polypaint stuff from ZBrush, you can use plugin Go Z or Go B, Go Blender. It's exporting with FBX because unfortunately in Blender if you export it's like OBJ polypaint, it doesn't work. You need to export like a FBX. If you export without FBX, it doesn't work. It's not work like a vertex color standard. For example, if you send OBJ from ZBrush to Marmoset, you will see your result and your polypaint. If you in material, in base color, you will be use parameter vertex color. But in Blender, it's a little bit different.
And confine the flame atop the mount. Let a new epoch begin, an epoch glistening with life. Brandish the Elden Ring for the age of the Erd Tree.
The Erd Tree would go on to be largely seen as a blessing for all of those in the lands between, especially those close to it in Leyndell, the capital city of the Erd Tree. The tree bestowed blessings. For example, the dew that dropped from its branches were like jewels. It loomed
I don't know,
overhead,
because with FBX I don't have problem.
its roots reached far and wide, relieving many of the burden of death. In fact, Erd Tree burial was one of the highest honors a hero could receive. One by one, the previous factions of the world fell. The giants were put to the sword, and their fell god was killed by Marika herself. The ancient dragons broke down the walls of Leyndell, but met fierce retaliation. However, I think the House of the Erd Tree encountered the most trouble against the land to their southwest, Leonia. Here, the House of the Moon repelled their offensives time and time again. And I mean that literally, because there was not just one, but two wars fought here, and in both of these, there was no victory for the Golden, nor for the Moon. And I suspect it was probably because of these lobsters. These damn things can snipe you from like a mile away, and it's bullshit. Actually, it was probably because of the Carrier Knights, who, according to their
Maybe
weapons,
you
were
need
able
to
wield sorcerer's
check
skills, and despite
what you
numbering
maybe
fewer than 20,
not
this
correct,
power made them
not
a
correct
match
deed,
for even the champions
because
of gold in battle. These enchanted knights were anointed
I don't
by
have
the Lunar
problem.
Queen,
Or maybe
a young
try
astrologer
use
who went on
different
to establish the House of Kara
plugin
as
for
royalty in
exporting
this land.
from ZBrush
With
to
her
Blender.
bewitching lunar magic, she won over the Academy of Raya Lucaria, where glintstone sorcery was studied, and united the Carrion royal family and the learned scholars of Raya Lucaria defended their home from the golden aggressors. At the head of this great golden army was Radagon.
Lord Radagon was a great champion, possessed of flowing red locks. He came to these lands at the head of a great golden host. When he met Lady Renala in battle,
These two champions clashed, fell in love, and joined their houses.
Radagon once cleansed himself with celestial dew, repented his territorial aggressions, and swore his love to Renala. The Order of the Erd Tree and the fate of the Moon were conjoined, and all the wounds of war forgiven.
You might think it strange that the Greater Will would permit this union, but it's not too odd, all things considered. As with most From Software games, sorcery and faith are just two sides of the same coin, and both of these powers stem from the cosmos. Radagon and Renala were known to have 3 children together. Lunar Princess Rani, who
Multi-tubes.
inherited her mother's propensity for lunar magic. Radan, who took after his father Radagon and would go on to master gravitational magic, and Rykard, who pioneered new hex
Sorry,
sorcery would go
I'm a
on
little
to
bit
defeat
confused. I a little
the
bit
Great
understand what you mean.
It follows that at some point after this,
Belt?
Radagon
What's a...
began to harbor doubts. Doubts about the golden
How did
order,
manage to
that
make
she had a hand in
belt
creating.
go
In
around
Marika's
character?
own words,
What's the belt?
I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order through understanding of the proper way. Our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past. My comrades, why must ye falter?
And it's at this point that we should talk about Marika's motivations, her character. This is surely going to be one of those huge points of debate in the coming years, but for now, my working theory is that she wanted to discover the truth behind order and the truth behind the greater will, and she believed that bonds had to be broken so that they could be better understood. She believed that there was great meaning to be found in hardship.
Queen Marika has high hopes for us, that we continue.
I mean, if you use multi-tubes, then do not attach to
His
geometry.
struggle ended at the end of
together.
his campaigns. According to his armor, he led the war against the giants, faced the Storm Lord alone, and then there came a moment when his last worthy enemy fell, and it was then, as the story is told, that the hue of Lord Godfrey's eyes faded.
Sorry, I really don't understand what you mean. I try to understand. One moment. Multi-tubes. What what does it mean, multi-tubes?
Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live.
Around character.
This became known as the Long March of the Tarnished, as Godfrey
In the
and
bottom.
his tarnished descendants walked away from the land.
You mean belt? This?
Queen Marika
Or what you mean?
absolutely had a plan here, that Lord Godfrey and his descendants would one day return stronger.
Or this?
Struggled outside of grace.
Then
It's a separate geometry all.
I will give back what I once claimed. Return to the lands between. Wage war. And
All things when
banish
what you
the
see, it's a separate things.
grow strong in the face of
Separate
death.
items.
Warriors of my lord, Lord Godfrey.
Soon after, she found a new husband. Either that or a new husband was found for her.
When Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was hounded from the lands between, Radagon left Renala to return to the Erdtree capital, becoming Queen Marika's second husband and king consort, taking the title of Second Elden Lord. The mystery endures.
This one, yeah?
As to why Lord
You
Radagon
mean
cast Lady Renala
how I get these items around this belt or what?
might be chosen for the seat of Elden Lord.
Whatever the case, as a part of this,
I use it just insert mesh and make it for handmade.
became demigod stepchildren, granted
That's
grace
all.
thanks to their new family.
It's just for
Renala
sketching.
was broken by this, and so was her country, Leonia. The Queen's set reads, when Renala, head of both the Academy of Raya Lucaria and the Carian royal family, lost her husband Radagon, her heart went along with him. And then those at the Academy realized
Oh fuck.
that Renala was no champion after all. In the wake of Radagon's betrayal and Renala's poor judgment, Leonia struggled with civil war, with the Academy of Raya Lucaria on one side and the Carian royals on the other. And it's here, during the age of the Erdtree, that Lunar Princess Rani, daughter of Renala and Radagon, stole a fragment of the Rune of Death.
It happened during the golden age of the Erdtree, long before the shattering of the Elden Ring. Someone stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith, the Black Blade.
As mentioned previously, Malekith was Marika's shadow, and he had sealed destined death in a black blade. Then a fragment, only a fragment, of this Rune of Death was stolen. And once this happened, Malekith went a step further in protecting destined death. He bound the blade within his own flesh, such that none might rob death ever again. It was too late, however. This fragment of the Rune of Death was used immediately, that night, to kill a demigod, Marika's own son, Godwyn the Golden.
That was the first recorded death of a demigod in all history, and it became the catalyst. Soon, the Elden Ring was smashed, and thus sprang forth the war known as the Shattering.
Now, there is a lot of really credible evidence that Marika was behind this plot to have a fragment of the Rune of Death stolen. There's also a ton of evidence that Marika is behind the entirety of your Tarnished quest, but we'll talk about that in another video. For now, all you really need to know, in terms of the timeline at least, is this. After the marriage of Marika and Radagon, and after a fragment of the Rune of Death was stolen, Marika went on to shatter the Elden Ring, and Radagon attempted to repair it, to no avail. The Elden Ring had been broken into runes, some great and some small.
You know, it's said that Lord Radagon harbored a secret. A famed sculptor of the Erdtree capital was once summoned to render Lord Radagon's likeness in giant stature, when he glimpsed the skeleton in Radagon's closet. And as such, it's said the great statue harbors his secret too.
Of course, the huge twist in Elden Ring is that Radagon is Marika, or depending on what you believe, he became her, for she knew it was going to happen.
In Marika's own words, O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both. Mine other self.
You can tell when From Software is keeping something a little bit open-ended, and of everything in Elden Ring's lore, this will also go on to be one of the biggest unknowns as we move forward. For example, the wording, thou art yet to become me, reinforces that Marika and Radagon were two separate entities before the shattering. However, in contrast, there is also evidence that Radagon was always part of Marika. For example, Enya says that
The demigods are each and all the direct offspring of Queen Marika.
But how can this be if Radagon married Renala and had those demigod children? The only way that makes sense is if Radagon was always Marika and he just went over there to seduce Renala long ago. I'll present more concrete theories in the future, but on this matter, the most important thing is, what do you think? While you can figure out a ton of Elden Ring's story, not all of it is open to interpretation. Certain things are, and this is one of them. And your interpretation is a big part of what makes this story special. At any rate, the union of Radagon and Marika seems to be a union of two fundamental opposing laws of the Golden Order.
Yep.
We mentioned these laws
For basic, I
earlier.
use
There's the law of causality, and
light
Marika
primitives,
is an agent of
spheres,
cause and
tubes,
effect. And
or
there's the
another
law of
things.
regression, as Radagon is a character who
I need
aspires
to
be complete and
see how
progress together.
this character
So
can
I
be
have a theory
look
that
with
forcing these two beings that
outfits,
represent these concepts
items,
together would
weapons,
help
clothes, or
curb
other
these
things with
deviants. But even so, she was imprisoned in the
in
Erdtree
different
for the crime of
maybe
shattering.
situation,
Marika's
with
justice
different
demanded a heavy
point of view,
sentence.
close up,
But even
far
in shackles,
distance, different
she
for
remains
analyze.
God and the vision's vessel.
The
If
conjoined
after that
Radagon
I
and
can
Marika
find
even had two
maybe
demigod children of their own,
compromise
Mikola
between
and Millennia.
what I need
These
and
two
what I want,
children were born afflicted. Mikola was cursed with eternal
I
torment,
make polishing,
and
remeshing,
Millennia harbored
some
a horrific
forms,
rot
items,
within. Even so, these
and
two
another
children
things.
were both chosen as Empyreans. They were immensely sacred beings and eligible to inherit godhood from the Greater Will. Perhaps the Greater Will was just desperate to find a worthy successor, and indeed in the Shattering War to come, many would try to claim the shards of the Elden Ring, and they would try to take the throne, including, of course, the Tarnished, who returned from their long march at long last, which we'll talk about in the next main lore video. I should probably also mention here that if you become a patron, you'll see upcoming lore videos early, as that's one of the rewards you get if you pledge to the $3 tier. And if you think my channel really adds a lot of value to the Souls games for you to the point where you pledge $20, then in this new tier you'll receive a new mug every 3 months that has a unique design on it, to do with the games by From Software. There are 4 to collect. The first one you'll get is inspired by Dark Souls, then Elden Ring, then Sekiro, and finally Bloodborne. And they all have fantastic art that I worked on with an amazing artist named Chu. But anyway, I figured this is the right place to end this video because the information here is going to be overwhelming. I bet it probably was too overwhelming, you know? It took me ages to commit these names and the relationships they had with other characters to memory, so I hope you guys are doing alright. one thing that helped me a lot was that we designed an enormous mind map with pretty much all of Elden Ring's lore, all of its item descriptions, all of its dialogues, all of the relationships between characters that we can think of. We added all of this together, and it helped a ton in learning about the story and visualizing it all. And one day I will make this asset available to you all, because I think after doing it, I think this is the quintessential way to piece together the story, and I think giving you guys this asset eventually will make that accessible for people. So I'm really excited about that. I want to thank Absa and Zard for accepting the paid task of helping me put all the raw data into this mind map so that I could better understand everything. I want to thank Paragod for fulfilling all of my footage requests and creating so many cinematic scenes for this video and for you all to enjoy. And I last of all want to thank John Devlin for the incredible thumbnail. And of course, thank you for watching. There are some really exciting things ahead, and I actually believe this might be the best story that From Software have ever put together. I just think not only are there so many amazing item descriptions, but so many of them are impactful. There are so many moments where you piece together the story and have like a eureka moment, and I'm enjoying it so much. But now I'm gonna go and play the game a little bit because I've been editing this video for too long. So, see you next time. The demigods are each and all the direct offspring of Queen Marika. There was Godwyn, Morgoth, Mohg, Radahn, Rykard, Ranni,
Ты про какие работы, здорово? Про то, что типа я сейчас делаю или что?
Melania, Blade of Mikola, and Melania. Not again. All of these demigods had fallen from grace by the time the shattering occurred. But in this video, I want to mostly talk about the origins of these characters, who these demigods were before the fall. And some of these demigods fell a long way indeed. Before he became this unsightly mess, Godwyn the Golden was quite the heroic figure. He was born of the promising union between Lord Godfrey and Queen Marika, and he achieved great renown for his bravery in one of their wars at least, the War of the Ancient Dragons. This war began when Grandsax, a great ancient dragon, rained calamity down upon Leyndell, marking the only time in historical record that Leyndell's walls had fallen. It's not clear why Grandsax first attacked, but fortifying themselves against lightning...
Ну, в Инстаграм, да, там, может, на Твиттер. На ArtStation, не знаю, тут нечего еще выкладывать.
And a bitter war against the ancient dragons was to follow. During this war, the Erdtree Sentinels had an epiphany.
Как бы есть что-то интересное, у меня всегда инста обычно забивается всякой парашей. Так, ща.
The grotesque sentinels served the Erdtree,
Я забыл
but
какой.
fought
Так.
with the claws of the enemy instead. In the end, the ancient dragons were routed once again. In a graveyard of swords,
Хочешь
by the
просто
stone
видеть, что
altar,
где, откуда
the end of the
вылетает
war
или
is
появляется.
coming.
Вот 100%, скорее
Here, we
всего,
learn
это
that
будет рано
during
или
battle,
поздно вот тут.
Godwyn the Golden defeated Fortisax, called the mightiest dragon of them all.
То есть
However,
я
he
в
did not
инсту
kill
обычно больше
Fortisax.
пушу.
Instead, he befriended him. And it was in this act
А, ну
that the powers of
тогда...
the ancient dragons truly
Твиттер. Ну, если для Твиттер тоже VPN, ну, значит, не судьба. Вот так вот. Значит, нигде не выложу. Ну, чё. Бусти или еще какой-то штуки у меня нету. Да и она мне, в принципе, не нужна. У меня не такая лояльная огромная аудитория, которая будет сидеть и ждать, блин, когда там Тёмыч что-то выложит. Конечно, было бы забавно, но так не работает.
But now, let's talk about Morgoth and Mohg, the Omen twins, who were also born of Godfrey.
Ай, что-то я это...
First,
Ну
what
так
is an
сделать,
omen?
да и все,
Well,
блядь.
to put it simply, an omen is an accursed child seen as impure, as they are born with horns on the body and face.
Ой-ой.
When this happens, the correct thing to do, culturally at least, is to cut off the horns of the omen, an act which usually causes them to perish. It's pretty messed up. But some omen do survive this process, and some omen are even given a cleaver crafted specifically for them and awarded as a tool of war.
Для меня можно и
These
лениться.
weapons are bestowed with a readiness to take them away.
Спасибо.
We find one such omen in
Я сам
Tree
ленивый.
King upon the
Мне
altar's
как-то раз,
Before you fight it,
не
you
знаю,
should notice
просили,
another
спрашивали
omen
завести
nearby,
что-то типа
writhing in its sleep.
Патреона и
It's
так
like
далее,
the
чтобы я
omens
туда
the
шарил,
evil
может,
spirits
став,
in the
кисточки,
darkness.
которые
I
там
think
делаю,
this
может быть,
omen is
модельки и
being
так далее, но,
haunted by the vengeful
блин,
spirits of its accursed kin.
я могу создать, а потом хер забью там на пару месяцев, потом, блин, люди будут, а мы платили бабки, а ты контент не делаешь. Поэтому я очень не люблю зависеть от чего-то такого.
The first omen killer was named Rollo, a famous perfumer who had to imbibe a physic to rid himself
Ну, у
of
него, кстати,
emotion
пропорции
so that he
неплохие
could better
идут.
perform his tasks.
Ой,
Remember,
бля.
it seems many omen have their horns excised when they're very young. That's definitely
Пушу сейчас
more than enough
традишку,
to
много
warrant
инфы,
a
капец.
motion-killing physic.
Ни разу традишку это
If the omen is born of royalty, then
не
their
изучал,
horns
и
are
да и
but
мне
the
лень.
omen is kept underground
Теперь
and
рисую только,
unbeknownst to
когда
anyone
мне
and
прям
imprisoned
очень
eternally.
настроение
By way of example, you would have seen all kinds
идет,
of
а так
omen confined to the
я еще
sewers
тот
beneath
лентяй.
Leyndell. But why are omen considered to be accursed in the first place? Some of them are clearly intelligent, so what's inherently wrong with being born with horns and great strength? Well,
Мне
it's
кажется,
important
здесь
to
надо
remember, I think,
сделать,
that
блин,
this
мочки
curse
вот
might
такие
only really
здоровые,
exist
здоровые.
in the context of the Golden Order. After all, those afflicted with omen horns are not able to return to the Erd Tree for rebirth and are said to be born outside of its
Ну,
grace.
пусть так будет пока
But
что.
why does the Golden Order
Традишка
disregard
это
the omen?
клево.
Well, it's hard to
Да
say
не
for
был бы
sure,
я
but
ленивый,
a
может быть,
working
тоже.
theory is that it's to do with the
Что-то
crucible.
поделал.
According to
Посидел,
this ancient
поизучал.
incantation, horns were once an
Чисто
aspect
базу.
of the Erd Tree's primordial crucible, where
Ничего
all life was
специфичного.
once blended together. And with the exception of a couple of crucible nights in
Ну, я
the
анатомию
Leyndell, we know that
по
the Golden
традишке
Order has
не
started to
смог
distance
бы
itself
учить.
from
У меня
most
бы жопа
things that touch
сгорела.
upon the crucible. While things like horns, knots, feathers, and scales once grew on the human body and
Мягко
were
говоря,
considered
блин.
signifiers of the divine,
У меня, к сожалению, методический подход обучения не особо работает. У меня работает, если я сам беру, щупаю и в тупую что-то пытаюсь повторить.
Unfortunately for the Order of the Erd Tree, these once divine impurities seem to crop up in some births, whether they like it or not. Almost like it's a genetic trait, as if it touches upon the crucible at the root of the Erd Tree. And so you have to ask, is it really a curse to be born as a graceless omen? Well, as with most curses in these games, I think that depends on your perspective. In any case, Moog and Morgoth were omen royalty.
Поэтому иногда завидую людям. Ты на экранчике работаешь? На работе, да, дома с этого, с обычного. На экранчике прикольно делать детальки, типа сидеть, полишить, всякие такие штуки. А с большими пропорциями и так далее, и мне не очень удобно. Ну, то есть, когда надо что-то базовые формы играть. Рисовать удобно на экранике. Поэтому на работе у меня сразу два планшета стоят. Один Cintiq, другой обычный, для разных нужд.
Here, deep below the earth, he would go on to build a dynasty of blood in reverence of a mother, something it seems he never truly had. As for Morgoth, he was born into the same accursed fate as his twin brother, but despite not being blessed with grace, he loved the Erd Tree all the same, and even took it upon himself to crawl out of the sewers and become the Erd Tree's protector when the Erd Tree needed him most. In the end, he rightfully became the Omen King and Lord of Leyndell. Omen or not, he was, after all, born of Godfrey and Marika's golden lineage. Of course, the marriage between Godfrey and Marika would be ended, and before long, Marika remarried with another man, a champion named Radigan, who Marika calls her other half. He became second Elden Lord and the king consort, but he also brought with him 3 children from a previous marriage that he had had with a Carian queen named Renala. These children...
Hello, hello. hello from,
They all became
at the moment, from Spain.
Radagon's reunion with Queen Marika. Possessed of his father's flaming red hair,
Ой, what the
Radahn was
fuck?
fond of its heroic implications and considered himself to be born of a great champion. Yet he also looked up to another man, Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, Queen Marika's first husband and the Lord of the Battlefield. But Radahn wasn't just the son of Radagon and an aspiring Lord of the Battlefield, he was also the son of Rennala, who was head of the Academy of Ryle.
What are you doing this for?
Queen of Caria. So as a carrier,
Just at the moment, just for fun, make
his
it.
will towards mastering gravitational magics. Rock sling,
You mean at this model? No, this model just for fun.
the town of sorcery, all so he would never have to abandon his beloved but scrawny steed. That said, before long, his powers would be put towards a more cosmic purpose than simply allowing him to ride his own horse. Radahn was taught gravitational magic by an alabaster lord, a member of a race of ancients with skin of
Yes,
stone who was
just
said
for
to have
fun.
risen to
It's
life
not
from
commercial,
ancient
it's
from
just
long ago. And when his lessons were complete,
free,
Radahn
maybe art freestyle.
Thank you for your tutelage. For now, I can challenge the stars.
And of course, he did conquer the stars, and the very constellations would be halted by his strength. But of course, you kind of have to ask, why? Why was it necessary to conquer the stars in the first place? Well, I have a couple of theories. Theory one is that it was done in self-defense. After all, according to the Sword Gravestone, Radahn was protecting Celia. What's more, gravitational magic has destructive power, and many gravitational beasts are proof of that destructive power. A being named Astel had even come down to the lands between in the past and destroyed a place called the Eternal City. What's more, Celians are descendants of
Моделить одежду
right above the Eternal City underground, so there is an argument
примерно год.
for Radahn purely defending Celia for some reason.
Это был
But it's
такой,
possible for Radahn to have fought in this conflict
как сказать.
and to have made the first move as well. So this is
Короче, это был один из первых моих фрилансов. Меня наняли тогда в Chaos Essence. Ну, Марка меня к себе взял тогда. И до работы с ним я никогда, в принципе, особо с одежду не тренил, и мне, в принципе, не особо не кайф ее было делать. На самом деле, я и сейчас не особо люблю одежку делать. Не разделяю любовь сидеть шмотки делать. Но, к сожалению, на работе я дохера это делаю. Чтобы научиться нормально делать, мне понадобился год. Но это, знаешь, год не так, что ты делаешь там один осет, там 3-4 месяца сет. Не, меня просто кинули, сказали, вот проект, и нужно, короче, фэнтезийные шмотки делать. И мне такие дали, типа, нужно 4 варианта одного какого-то набора сетов, там, типа, грейд от дна до такого high priority. И я сидел просто с сутками напролет. То есть мне 2 месяца дали, мне надо было тогда 4 сета за это время выдолбить, по-моему, да. И вот из-за такого жесткого трэш-броска я чему-то научился. То есть в основном базовом моделировании одежды и, в принципе, как ее добиваться, складки лепить, как работать металл там создавать. Это было хардкорно, потому что я сидел, в выходные работал, то есть у меня не было времени на свои персональности. То есть это был такой, как... Курс молодого 3D-шника, назовем так.
Cool detail. But unlike her brother, Radahn, she quite clearly took after her mother more, who was Rennala, head of the Carian royal family. The House of Caria has this storied history, one that seems to go way back to the astrologers. In the Carian Manor, we find one of their treasures, the Sword of Night and Flame. It reads, astrologers who preceded the sorcerers established themselves in mountaintops that nearly touched the sky and considered the fire giants their neighbors. Rennala herself was an astrologer, always chasing the stars in her youth. Then she met the full moon, and in time
Ну, это видишь, как, короче... Я, в принципе, для себя, когда начал, я определил, что кроме вот этого дерьма мне больше ничего не интересно и не надо. Уже по жизни, по факту.
Now, however, there is only one princess, Rani, daughter of Renala. And at the time of her birth, she would have been set to inherit quite a lot of power indeed, for the Carian royal family was at its height, and her mother was not only queen, she was also head of the Academy of Raya Lucaria.
Поэтому я убивал все свое свободное время. С друзьями не общался. Тупо сидел целыми днями и дрочил, чтобы чему-то научиться. Ну, я в принципе... Да, по сути, у меня и сейчас примерно такая же фигня. Отчасти из-за того, что я этим занимаюсь, я больше не общаюсь с теми, с кем как... Ну, с друзьями давними, с которыми общался. То есть... Когда меня звали там куда-то пойти, еще что-то, я всегда морозился и говорил, ну вот у меня это, я моделю, мне надо что-то делать. И вот так, по сути, на протяжении уже дофига лет я сижу и этим занимаюсь.
Just a theory, but I think the moons kind of act as guides. The lost black moon of Noxtella, for example, was the guide of countless stars. What's more, Rani and Renala were heavily influenced by their moons. Renala's moon bewitched the academy that she became the head of, and Rani's dark moon, for its part, also imparts wisdom.
Ну, для меня просто логика такая, что если хочется чего-то достичь в этой профессии и, в принципе, уметь, надо ей посвятить ей всю жизнь. Если это делать как просто хобби, ну, мало чего из этого выйдет. Ну, если именно есть какие-то амбиции. Я занимаюсь этим уже 6 лет. Уже капец, конечно, время пролетело.
Remains, carefully setting new plans into motion. Sibling to Rani and Radahn was a man.
Ну да, 6 лет назад я сидел, пытался там в блендере что-то скульптить, там сферы какие-то моделить. Сейчас сижу, ну, вот такое всякую штуки давлю. В РФ остались крутые ребята. Ну, наверное, я не знаю, я мало с художниками нашими общаюсь. Вот с художники, с которыми я в основном общаюсь, вот, ну вот Вадим. По большей части. Я мало, в принципе, знаком с кем.
The crest of red feathers are there to symbolize Rykard's pedigree as Lord Radagon's son, and the emblem upon their chest piece represents a lord who had lofty ambitions. However, as Rykard delved into the ancient secrets of Mount Gelmir, he came across the immortal Great Serpent, an ancient deity that aligned with Rykard's ambitions. And so,
так-то сложно сказать, я без понятия. Я знаю, что все художники посливались, когда начались все эти великолепные события, в кавычках. Все поубегали, все разъехались. На самом деле, я тоже, по сути, из-за этого и уехал. Когда все это началось. Тем более, я не сильно хотел на фронт. Потому что я... Если б не художество, я бы был военным. Потому что я учился на военного, я служил в срочке. То есть, по факту, у меня должна была быть карьера вояки. Ну вот, художник победил меня.
As you know, Radagon's marriage with Renala did not last. Afterwards, he returned to the Golden Order.
А так очень много художников поуходило, типа многие пошли в студии работать, потому что, ну, виза нужна. Хотят
Now,
там
in the
стабильность,
last
еще
full
что-то.
video, I briefly proposed that these two twins were born after the shattering, after Radigan and Marika had merged together to become a single god. However, I've since changed my mind. I think Millennia and Mikola were clearly born before the shattering. There's just so much proof that these two twins were a force that were influencing the world long before the shattering took place. Anyway, both of these twins were born afflicted. Specifically, in
Ой,
Dragon's text,
как
it's stated
сейф.
that birds were vulnerable. Mikola was born
Я думаю, что
afflicted
еще
with
есть
no
художники
ability, and
крутые
Millennia,
в
for her
России, но
part,
просто
was
я с ними не
vulnerable.
знаком. Я, в принципе, из
Interestingly, Millennia's scarlet rot is actually an
с нашего
outer god.
комьюнити мало с
This
кем
outer
знаком.
god,
У
like
меня,
many
если
wizards,
брать...
seems to
И
be
раньше я
a
дохера
god
типа с кем
that
общался,
is
если
able to
брать
be
где-то лет
imposed
5
on
назад.
the world via an
Сейчас
intelligent
у меня
vessel.
от круг
Millennia was
общения,
the possessor.
даже не
The
считая
rot is
людей
pretty
не из
terrible.
3D, это вот мне
Some would
хватит,
argue that it's
наверное,
not
одной руки
indeed.
сосчитать, с кем я общаюсь
According
в
to
основном.
Cowrie, the order
Это
of
не
rot
то, что, знаешь,
is
привет, пока там раз
a
в год с
cycle
кем-то, а
of
с кем
death
прям, ну,
and
часто и
rebirth.
всегда
Kind of like the
переписываемся и
lotus
так далее.
flower
Ну,
that
можно
is a
назвать
flower
как
that blooms
корешимся,
only
друзья
when
там и т.д.
fresh from mud. I actually have art of this flower hanging in my home. I always love the symbol of it. I actually have lots of art hanging now, and I'm going to talk about all of this artwork that you can buy at the end of the video.
Армор нужно
Anyway,
уметь
so
делать.
Millennia
Очень
the
многие
Imperial was
люди
vulnerable to
думают, что
and afflicted by the
делать,
Scarlet
когда
Rot.
персонажа, они
There was
будут
said to be
сидеть
no
делать
cure to
лица
this,
там
and
лепить,
while fire
только
and consecration seemed to be somewhat effective
органику,
at
анатомию.
warding it
Ну
off,
не.
Millennia was still used
90% работы персонажника это сидеть
Interestingly,
и
old
шматье
legends
для
of the
персов
Scarlet
делать.
Rot have persisted in the world
Персонажей
for
для игр
centuries,
делают там
and
буквально
learn
несколько
more
штук
about
для
the
всех.
Red God from the Blue Dancer charm. The
Поэтому
dancer in
да,
blue
правильно
represents
выбираешь.
fair
Хочешь
weather,
реально
legend,
быстро и
the story
хорошо
of the
находить
fallen
работу,
sword,
научись еще
or
волосы
blind
делать.
swordsman. Blade
Будешь
in
иметь
hand,
волосы,
the
вообще
swordsman
проблем не
sealed
будет
away
ни
Radiant's
с чем.
pride, a god that was wrought
Хейр-артистов
against
с руками
Specifically,
отрывают
this god was
среди
long ago sealed
персонажников.
away in the stagnant water that is downstream of the
Потому
Angel
что
River
есть
in
такая
Radiant.
херня, что
And
люди... Ну, я
wherever
понимаю,
rot
почему
is, the
люди не
kindred
особо
rot
любят
may as
заниматься
well.
хейрами.
These are pests
Потому что если ты
and
один раз
foes
показал
of the rot.
классный скилл хейра,
Now,
тебя
in the
будут потом
current
все
age,
время
these are
доставать,
servants
чтобы
that
ты
have
их
been
часто делал.
forsaken by Millennia, who
Особенно если ты
is their
уровень
new
показал.
goddess. So, this blind
Мало людей,
swordsman
кто любит
with the
волосы
flame-curved
делать.
sword actually went on to become Millennia's mentor.
Мне нравится
And it
шер
is him
сделать, а
that
вот
we have
прически
today
модельные,
facing
ну
goddamn
прям
attack.
фу,
The prosthesis wearer
прям
emblem tells us
подташнивает.
more. A talisman engraved with a scene from a heroic tale.
Ну это правильно, потому что если... Это ж... Ты же вроде, да, оборотни там показывал? Или я путаю?
She gained wings of unparalleled strength. Millennia's ridiculous attack is
Yep.
called the waterfowl dance, and aesthetically it makes sense that, flowing waters would counter the effects of rot. For just as still waters turn foul, stagnation turns to decay. Thus, warriors must remain ever drifting. And indeed, Millennia does resist the call of the rot. There's a lot of evidence that she's not really a willing vessel, but through sheer will and sense of self, she resists the rot. And only when she is truly pressed in battle will she abandon this will and bloom into the goddess within. Millennia's first bloom was during her fight against Radahn, and releasing her scarlet rot was a last-ditch effort that would forever taint the land of Caelid and cripple Radahn. So, whatever she was fighting for in this fight against Radahn, somehow it was worth this terrible act. In general terms, at least, it's clear that Millennia was fighting for her brother. Apart from the times where she relapses into being the goddess of rot, she is known as the Blade of Mikola. She actually goes to great lengths to tell you this. I don't know if you heard. Despite being the toughest boss in From Software history, she's actually fighting for his right to godhood, not her own. In Millennia's own words, her brother Mikola possesses the wisdom, the allure of a god. He is the most fearsome Empyrean of all. For his part, Mikola did a lot to earn his sister's dedication, not the least of which was inspiring her armor and a prosthetic of unalloyed gold. And it's not just his sister that loved Mikola, many people did. The Bewitching Branch is an item that you can use to turn enemies into temporary allies, and it reads, "Indeed, he has learned very well how to compel such affection." For his father Radigan, Mikola fashioned and gifted to him a fundamentalist incantation called Triple Rings of Light, Radagon then returns the favor, gifting back an incantation called Radagon's Rings of Light. These interactions show some of Miquella's positive connections with his father and also Golden Order fundamentalism. And yet, the young Miquella abandoned fundamentalism, for it could do nothing to treat Millennia's accursed rot. This was the beginning of unalloyed gold. So, what is unalloyed gold? Well, an alloy is a composition of metals.
Так, где моя водичка? Что-то у меня сушит.
Essentially, with no external mixtures.
Блин, надеюсь, я не хапану этот дебильный ковид. У нас, блин, начали болеть. И я еще такой уставший чувствую себя последние дни.
Specifically, this needle was crafted for his sister to ward off the rot god and forestall the effects of the incurable rotting sickness. We see the bond between the siblings as well when we visit Miquella's Halig tree. We see a statue of a one-armed woman embracing a child, Miquella. In this place, we see the biggest example of Miquella's benevolence, the Halig tree, and the society that was built into the brace that supports it. This was a promised land, seen as a salvation to many who were shunned or persecuted, provided that they can actually find a path here, of course. And like many other Empyreans, Miquella seems to have had the will within them to create a new order, and his is an order that's somewhat modeled on the ones that came before it. The biggest thing is that the Halig tree is clearly inspired by the Erd tree, but the difference is that Miquella's Halig tree is said to be accepting of all, even those the Erd tree shuns. Miquella himself was once embedded inside of the Halig tree, and he watered it with his very own blood since it was a mere sapling. Tragically, however, he was ripped out of this womb during the shattering, and his Halig tree ultimately failed to grow into an Erd tree, becoming a misshapen husk instead. But that's the story for another day. There's also a ton of cut content to do with Miquella, and he's one of the most mysterious demigods, who I'm sure we'll learn about more later. But there is one more thing that I want to mention before I go. It's kind of one theory I had during the making of this video. So, Miquella and Millennia each have their own butterflies. Millennia's is the Aeonian butterfly, which inhabit the swamp of Aeonia, and are rumored...
Вообще, типа, рекомендую Substance... с Марвелосом подружиться. У нас... Ну, у меня, например, люди, с которыми я частенько работал, у них проблема, что они его даже, ну, основ не знают. Так что рекомендую. Марвелус тоже. Так, давайте-ка я его немножко квиксейв сделаю. Ой. Потвикаю его, потому что мне не нравится, как он сейчас, у него ноги он стоит.
Again, that's just a theory, but what I really want to talk about here is that at the very
least,
Melina is almost certainly the daughter of Marika. We learned this a long time ago from looking at her name in the game's files, and we can further infer it from her dialogue, as she has a few lines that refer to mothers and one that says that she was born inside the Erd tree. So her being the daughter of Marika is also just a theory, but this one is much more concrete than the butterfly one. Although the reason I like the butterfly theory is that it gives us a hint as to who Melina's parents might have been. Her parents would have been Radagon and Marika, which is to say Marika herself alone, I guess, because Radagon is Marika.
Так, надо вот это убрать нахер.
Melina as a character has only become more mysterious since the game was released, and I'm really only scratching the surface with this theory. But speaking of times before Elden Ring was released, back then, a long time ago, I commissioned this piece from a renowned artist named Marco, and now I'm so excited to reveal it for the first time. This storybook scene is heavily inspired by the early looks we had at Elden Ring, with a red-haired protagonist, spirit companions, a mount that looks like Yakul and a bit like Torrent, and a few other hidden details in the piece. This piece and all of my other prints are now available over at Spring, where you can actually buy them fully framed and ready to hang. They actually ship with a beautiful frame. The frame itself is a nice black satin finish, and you can even opt for a white border around the print, which I think looks really classy in certain cases. I think these posters are a cool way to support the channel and artists, and for you to actually get something in return that will make your room look better. So check out my prints if you're interested, but this is the end, and thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Where do you go after death?
Блин, планшет
What is
тупит,
the right
что-то.
way to die? Can death be overcome?
Да, господи, ты
If
чё,
it can,
прикалываешься,
what are
что
the
ли?
consequences of such a thing? These questions are at the very heart of Elden Ring's story, and in order
Неужто
to answer them,
старика
we need to
уже
go over
надо
a set of
менять,
bosses
походу?
that are defined by their relationship
Или может
to
это
death.
стержень у меня
Those being
сточился,
the
надо
death
будет
birds,
чекнуть
the
потом.
ancestral spirits, the tibia mariners, the godskins, the burial watchdogs, and the black knife assassins. Understanding these bosses will teach you so much. In Elden Ring, oneself is separated into two distinct entities. There's the body, which is one's physical self or corporeal flesh, and then there's the spirit, which is essentially the soul that commonly persists after death. In the age of the Erd Tree, the bodies of the dead and their spirits are returned to the Erd Tree. This is done via a process called Erd Tree Burial, where great tree roots in catacomb dungeons absorb the dead so that they might be immortalized with the Erd Tree. But it was not always this way. In fact, the entire culture of death had a different shape in the earlier days of the Lands Between. Back then, instead of Erd Tree Burial, death commonly burned in Ghost Flame. Ghost Flame, also known as Spirit Flame, is a cold, white flame that is created when bones are burned to ash. We learn this from the fallen hawks.
Так, ладно, пока так оставлю, потом буду править все это говно непонятного. Так. Был он такой. Настал вот такой. Сейчас узнаем, кстати.
I speculate that we see proof of this even in the current age, where the wandering dead at Agil Lake gaze at the sky, praying that the dragon Agil might burn them to ash. Perhaps this was simply the acceptable way to put a tired body to rest. The keepers of Ghost Flame were the Deathbirds, who tended to the flame in their graveyards, raking out the ashen
Так, дайте-ка квиксейв бахну и заодно проверю, что будет.
So I like to think of the Deathbirds as serving the old process of death and delivering death by reducing bodies to ash so that spirits might be better able to move on. Now, admittedly, a lot of these spirits are vengeful, and that's how Ghost Flame is sort of weaponized by the Deathbirds and sorcerers. But I do think that at its core, Ghost Flame was important just because it separated the body and the spirit. After all, the explosive Ghost Flame sorcery compares this process of death to the Erd Tree's process of death, which was pretty all-encompassing, so I think it's safe to assume that Ghost Flame was just really important to the process of death, and it was more than just...
Не, сейчас у него в этом плане характер потерялся. Надо, чтобы характер остался, ладно.
Next we should talk about the Twin Bird, which was the mother of the Deathbirds. We don't find this creature in-game, but we can find its likeness painted vividly upon a kite shield that one of the Deathbirds drops. The design might remind you of a phoenix, which is traditionally drawn with bright colors and a crest of feathers and a longish neck. Of course, the phoenix is a creature
Он пока
that
так.
rises from the ash when it
Надо
dies,
просто чуть-чуть
which
тогда
is
ниже
obviously
стоп вот
extremely
так вот
fitting for this
поставить,
story.
и
So
все.
the kite shield
То есть
tells us
Стасову
that
не
the
надо
Twin
было
Bird,
сильно.
this phoenix creature, is said
Всё.
to be the mother of the Deathbirds. But not only that, it's also called the envoy of an outer god. So we can kind of compare the Twin Bird to the Two Fingers, then, who are also envoys to an outer god. They are envoys to the Greater Will, and similarly, I assume the Twin Bird probably communes with some outer god of death. And while we're definitely left wondering what
Я
greater
думал, что это,
purpose
блядь,
this
они
outer
такие
god
черные.
might have, the mere fact that it exists lends a lot of significance to the Twin Bird and its Deathbirds as well. A variation on the Deathbird is the Death Right Bird, which is an alternate boss, and it's a far more threatening foe, as it actually seems to use power that it's gained from certain spirits and Ghost Flame. And if you look really closely at its ethereal wings, you might even spy little spirits lurking within. And when I saw these, I was really excited because I recognized the weapon they're using, and the weapon explains who they are. They're holding a little death ritual spear, and that item reads, "The priests became the guardians of the birds through the rite of death, which is a part of their contract for a far-off resurrection." So deathbirds have a lot to do with sacrificial rites. You know, they don't just attend to the ghost flame, they also deliver death, and they also perform rites of death. So we can assume that these priests were sacrificed in a rite of death so that they could lend a sort of spiritual strength to the deathbirds. But we're still left wondering about the nature of their contract with the deathbirds, which promises a far-off resurrection for them. You know, what agreement did these priests come to with the deathbirds? I wonder what has to happen for their contract to be fulfilled, and how will they even be resurrected? In terms of where the deathbirds appear, they kind of appear everywhere, and I think that might be a hint that their influence was once present far and wide. And while their importance in the current age is likely quite diminished, they still definitely are relevant in the Lands Between. In fact, many other enemies actually make reference to them, and some even successfully channel their powers. Even Ghostflame lights the way in Catacomb dungeons to this day. But in general, there is a lot of power that can be gained from death in the Lands Between, which brings us to the Ancestral Spirit. In the flourishing landscapes underneath the Lands Between, you would have found the bodies of 3 large stags enshrined by the ancestral followers. These warriors, hunters, and shamans believe heavily in the principle that life sprouts from birth, but also from death. I think this principle is sort of represented by horns, because in real life, horns continue to grow throughout the lifespans of animals.
Так, хочется им еще какую-то шкуру, блин.
And here, the largest and most influential creature is a giant stag.
Мутануть.
In the world of
Может,
Elden
реально
Ring, since life
ему и
continues
сделать ее.
after death, it makes sense then that this creature's antlers continue to bud and grow even after its death. We learn this from defeating the regal ancestor spirit and looking at the horn of this fallen king. New growths bud, glowing with light. Thus does new life grow from death, and from death one obtains power.
Такую, типа,
All lived
накидку
beasts
небольшую.
are worshipped by the ancestral followers, a race of beings who keep their distance from the Erd Tree and are just content to await new buds and new growth. If a being does not show signs of budding horns or new growth, then they are sacrificed with an axe called the Winged Greathorn. Interestingly, the twin blades of this sacrificial axe are called...
Так, что я тут один, походу, остался.
Might be a reference to the
Так,
twin
тиран-то
blade
тут?
mentioned earlier,
Или я
which
тут
was
один?
also a winged envelope. According to the Horn Charm talismans, the ancestral spirits specifically arise from long-lived beasts, and I think this touches on another commonly
видимо,
mentioned
да,
theme
один.
in
Ну
Elden
ладно.
Ring, which is that there are benefits to living life to its fullest potential. To quote some more Deathbird items, the most glorious end awaits those who cling tenaciously to life, and it is important to render up a death worth offering. Those who lived a heroic life were even able to go on and see a unique version of grace in the afterlife. We currently think that this grace is red, and that these are the same red rays of grace that you might have noticed when you first explored the Forbidden Lands. So this might be the most intriguing part of the video. Let me explain. Past the Forbidden Lands and deep within the consecrated snowfields is a Tibia Mariner, and this one drops Helfin's Steeple, a greatsword that reveals just a mind-blowing amount of lore for one item. First, it reads, "Greatsword patterned after the black steeple of
Да
the
не,
Helfin,
многовато
the
что-то на нем
lamp
становится
which
одежды,
guides the
пизду.
dead of the spirit world."
Я не хочу
So the
много.
word steeple is commonly used to describe
Что-то
the tall
такого
spire
племенного,
found in churches.
голышого.
And
Может быть,
indeed, the design of Helfin's steeple
другая
echoes that
форма
of the
какая-то
Morion
той
Lode
херни.
from Dark Souls, which also referenced the spire of a church. However, while I think Helfin is likely to be a sort of church, I don't think it's a building. Instead, this item
Ну,
seems to be describing
такое, да,
the
было
shape
бы
of a black
неплохо.
tree in the spirit
Ну,
world,
как
the
силуэт работает.
so-called lampwood or lamplight tree that serves as a guide.
Ну, можно, в принципе, пока так.
The item goes on to say that lamplight is similar to grace in appearance, and it is said that it
Ай,
can only be
блять,
seen by
промазал.
heroic
А, не, не
spirits
промазал.
or those who met their death in battle. So the black tree of Helfin is almost like this dark mirror of the Erd tree, but in the spirit world. It's so interesting that it even gives off its own guidance of grace, and there's a few reasons we speculate that this grace might be red. First, a red gem can be found at the very tip of Helfen's steeple, and a gem on the rolled medallion as well. Plus there's a red glow visible from the sword's gem, and a red glow from the rolled medallion when you hold it up at the Grand Lift, where it takes you to the Forbidden Lands, where we speculate that you can briefly glimpse this lamplight or red grace filtering between the trees. So you might be asking, why can we see the grace when we're not dead? But technically Tarnished are defined as the dead who yet live, so it might make some sense that we can see it. The next question is, where does the lamplight lead? And I think there's two options. One is that the lamplight might lead back to Helfen itself. That is the source of the light after all, and Helfen's steeple can be enwreathed in ghost flames, so maybe the dead are sort of put to rest here. Alternatively though, I guess it's also possible that the lamplight has plans for the heroic dead, just like Grace has plans for the Tarnished. It might lead them somewhere else as well. We just don't know. In my discussions with Quelaag, who helped with these theories, she pointed out the similarities that Helfen has with Valhalla of Nordic folklore. If you don't know, Valhalla is a place where brave spirits would be invited to dine with the gods. And it seems that Helfen is inspired by that same sort of folklore, since only heroic spirits can see the light. Not to mention, Hel, with one L, is actually the name of the world of the dead in Nordic folklore. And speaking of folklore, this finally brings us back to the Tibia Mariner, the boss that dropped Helfen's steeple in the first place. The Tibia Mariners themselves actually have no written lore to speak of, which is kind of a shame, but what they do have is an incredible visual design, and it kind of carries them from a lore perspective, because this visual design is steeped very heavily in appropriate folklore. So, in Greek mythology, there is a stretch of water called the River Styx, which marks the boundary between Earth and the underworld, and to help souls of the deceased cross this river, you have to find the river boatman and pay him to safely take you across. Just so, I kind of imagine the dead in Elden Ring are being drawn to the Tibia Mariner in a similar fashion. You know, he has a purple lantern and a loud horn, and he might offer a similar sort of guidance to the underworld. There is one spell that references this boss briefly. It's Tibia's Summons, and it says, "For time immemorial, the dead have been those who are lost and require guidance and leadership." Suffice to say, death was a very important facet of life in the Lands Between, even for the gods at one point. Which brings us to the Godskins, an order of apostles that were born to deliver destined deaths to the gods long ago. I kind of like to think of them as a counterbalancing force to the influence of gods, wielding sharp tools for boring and slicing through flesh, and incanting spells that mocked the wrath of the gods. It seems these Godskins actually succeeded in hunting many gods, if their name is to be believed. Their robes were made by sewing together patches of smooth skin, and the nobles' robes include subcutaneous fat, which makes them plump and soft. Known for their seven-faced aprons, these nobles are the most ancient apostles, and they're deeply inhuman. Their weapon is not a slicer, but a stitcher, and they wield it with a skill that is unmatched by any lowborn. These beings were elevated to a social class above the lowborn because they served a queen, a glowmide queen. The black flames they wield are actually channeled from that queen's greatsword, and it was this queen who raised them from birth in the first place, cradling her newborn apostles in godskin cloth, so that they might grow to become the death of the gods. This glowmide queen was powerful, but what makes her character so important is that she was also an Empyrean, chosen by the Fingers. Now, remember, an Empyrean is a candidate chosen by the Two Fingers to become a god, so despite being such a dark character, the Glowmide Queen was still a valid choice for godhood, and all of this, of course, was before the Rune of Death had been removed from the Elden Ring, and it was from this Rune of Death that the Black Flame originally got its power. We only know of one other Empyrean alive at this time, and that would have been Queen Marika. Naturally, at some point, Marika and the Glowmide Queen clashed. Though, according to the Godslayer Greatsword description, we know that the Glowmide Queen was defeated by Malekith, who was the shadow of Queen Marika. He is credited with defeating the Glowmide Queen and the Apostles, and sealing off the Rune of Death, which again was the source of their power. What's not clear to me about all of this, though, is whether Marika and the Glowmite Queen were rival Empyreans competing for godhood, or if Marika was already a god and decided to take out the Glowmite Queen because the Glowmite Queen was an Empyrean threat to her age. But at any rate, it seems like Marika and the Glowmite Queen are opposites. You know, the Glowmite Queen ends ages, but Marika wished for an age eternal, so it makes sense that they'd clash, but there's still so much we don't know about them. But after all of this, Marika's Age of the Erd Tree began, and during this age, you were supposed to wait for the roots of the Erd Tree to call to you, so that your spirit could return to the Erd Tree after death to be immortalized with it. Specifically, these roots were found in catacomb dungeons, and there's even a statue found across the lands between that was designed to help people find these catacomb dungeons. This is the statue of Rosus, the Usher of Death, and he shows the dead the path towards catacomb dungeons. The catacombs themselves were built in the Age of the Erd Tree. This is proven by root resin, which states that the roots here were once linked to the Erd Tree, and it was for this reason that catacombs were constructed around these great tree roots. So at this point in history, Queen Marika had implemented her new concept for death in the lands between, and in her eyes, a proper death meant returning to the Erd Tree. Thus, in the days where catacomb roots were connected to the Erd Tree, these catacombs were valid sites of Erd Tree burial, and I think we literally see this taking place, as corpses can be seen being absorbed by the roots at the end of every catacomb dungeon. The process of Erd Tree burial, though, is described as an honor reserved for heroes, and this process of Erd Tree burial is presided over by Erd Tree burial watchdogs, who protect the catacombs with their impish servants. These creatures are golems, and I think that they might have been created specifically during the period of history where Liurnia had an allegiance with Leyndell, since they serve the process of Erd Tree burial, but their weapons actually have glintstone embedded in them. Furthermore, when hit by impure crystal darts, they malfunction, which I think is further proof of their glintstone origins. In some catacombs and graveyards, the physical bodies of the dead have begun to rise. Now, these beings are defined as those who live in death, and they are a relatively recent phenomenon in the lands between. Instead of having their body and spirit return to the Erd Tree, they rise, in an act that is completely at odds with Marika's concept of death, Erd Tree burial, and the Golden Order. I'll go into more detail on this later when we talk about Godwyn, but basically, this all began when Rani stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malakath, and then she imparted its power onto the knives of the Black Knife Assassins. You can tell the Assassins have quite a lot of secrets in their lore. We do know a few things, though. We know that they're all women, they're all Newman, and they have links to Queen Marika and the Eternal City as well. We'll have to go into more detail on them later, though. But with their knives imbued with the Rune of Death, they carved a curse mark into two demigods, Rani and Godwyn. The curse mark itself is an obtainable item, and it reads, "This curse mark was carved at the moment of death of the first demigod, and should have taken the shape of a circle. However, two demigods perished at the same time, breaking the curse mark into two half-wheels. Rani was the first of the demigods whose flesh perished, while the Prince of Death perished in soul alone." So interestingly, these assassins and the knives imbued with the Rune of Death had the power to cleave life from the physical body and from the spirit as well. Specifically, Rani was the one whose flesh perished, and she became a disembodied spirit, free from her corporeal flesh, which is what she wanted, and she now occupies a doll. But Godwyn became the Prince of Death, living without a soul and spreading the Rune of Death across the lands between through Deathroot. Now, according to item descriptions, Deathroot is the Rune of Death itself, and it acts as a source that gives rise to those who live in death. Now, what I find really interesting is the fact that this Rune of Death that is embodied by Deathroot and those who live in death, it clearly has aspects of both death and life as well, which makes sense based on what you should have learned from this episode, right? Because death isn't just the end, it's life as well. So it makes sense that those who live in death would have aspects of death and life, all contained in these beings that were brought to life in a sense by the Rune of Death. And while those who live in death are a bit unnatural because they do come from this fragmented Rune of Death, this half of a curse mark, they still have life in death, and so you can argue that they still have a right to life. And in fact, that's entirely what one of the endings is about, at least how I understand it, and I'll try to explore it more thoroughly later on. These beings are persecuted and hunted down by fundamentalists of the Golden Order, and whether these fundamentalists are truly serving the fundamentals of order in the first place is just a topic that is very interesting to explore. So, in conclusion, maybe it shouldn't be a sin to live in death. After all, to quote Fear, "In death there is only peace, for in death there can be no sensation." Thank you for watching. Special thanks to Quailag for looking over this script. She has an awesome channel that you really should go and check out, and it's been great to have someone to just discuss my ideas with. But I'd also like to thank Eve, the sponsor of this video, who'd like me to talk about Spectrum, which is their high-end gaming monitor. Now, I ignore 99% of the sponsorship emails that come my way, but this one caught my eye because I follow a lot of tech YouTubers and I already knew that they had a lot of good things to say about this product, so I'll leave links to those more detailed reviews in the description, but let me just explain a little bit about the Eve Spectrum first. So the Spectrum is a high-end product, and it has a high but fair price tag to match. It's a 27-inch panel with tiny bezels, and at 4K resolution, games like Elden Ring look absolutely gorgeous. I've also been blown away by the color accuracy and clarity of this monitor while editing. Furthermore, if you're into any competitive FPS games, you'll especially love that it also has a 144Hz refresh rate and a 1 millisecond response time, which is very impressive considering it also does 4K resolution. The thing I like most though is that even with all of these gamer specs, it presents as a clean, professional monitor without any RGB or overt branding. If you're in the market for a high-end monitor, then you can click the links in the description to pick one up yourself. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Many of Elden Ring's bosses serve Marika's Golden Order in some shape or form, whether they're loyal to it or enslaved by it. So let's discuss all of these bosses, starting at a time before Order had even come to the lands between. To the north are Mountaintops of the Giants, a name that makes it abundantly clear just who dominated this region of the world. However, it was not always this way. According to the Borealis' mist incantation, the ice dragons were once lords of the mountaintops long ago, until they were defeated by the fire giants and chased from the peak. And perched upon this peak stands an enormous forge. Interestingly, the chain rings of this forge depict dragons, which might be a reference to the dragons that once dwelt here, and while I don't think we can say for sure who built this forge, the art of smithing is said to have originated among the giants, and the craft was even once considered divine. So it seems likely that at the very least, they made good use of this fire. Sparks from this forge would fall down and fertilize the smoldering flowers that bloomed upon the mountaintops, and it seems like it was a pretty crucial part of life in this region. The most ancient giants here were called fire giants, and according to the Burn O Flame incantation, they have long held a solitary curse to serve as keepers of the flame for eternity. Now, traditionally in From Software games, curses are the domain of the gods, and indeed, the fire giants are cited to have borrowed power from one such god, who is represented here by a single large red eye. This god is called a god of the flame, and it's believed to be able to inhabit fire itself, as well as the bodies of the fire giants who worshipped it. The giants shared borders with the astrologers, who, according to their legendary Sword of Night and Flame, established themselves in the mountaintops and considered the fire giants their neighbors. The relationship here is implied to be friendly, even collaborative maybe, as the sword does combine the power of both flame and the power of the primeval current that's glimpsed within the night sky. The sword would go on to become a treasure of the Carrion royal family, and the Carrions themselves are likely descendants of the astrologers. Generations later, these Carrion royals would call upon their old giant allies for aid, but we'll get to that in a moment. The fire giants also had another neighbor, with whom relations were not so amicable. Further down the mountains, just past the Forbidden Lands, roamed the Knights of Zamor. According to their armor, these long-lived warriors, clad in biting, freezing winds, are said to have been the mortal enemies of the fire giants since time immemorial. According to their weaponry, these beings were devoted to winter itself and had weapons styled after icy winds and bodies that were cloaked in swirling ice storms. It makes good sense that such cold beings would be natural mortal enemies of the fire giants, and they commonly did challenge their larger rivals. But it seems like their true chance came when Queen Marika waged war against the fire giants, and the Knights of Zamor gladly joined her offensive. They earned great renown amongst the Order of the Erd Tree, and many ancient heroes of Zamor became hailed as heroes, as the fire giants were largely wiped from the face of the earth after this war. Now, up until now, I've resisted calling the giants evil, but the reality is that in pretty much every item description, their god is described as a fell god, and the giant's flame is a flame of ruin. And to be fair, their god doesn't seem